Welcome to all of you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Smart Card Alliance. The topic for today's webinar is contactless EMV payments and merchant opportunities. The focus of this webinar is going to be on contactless payments and how merchants might be preparing for the adoption of future contactless payments delivery in the future. We can go to our next slide. For many of you, this might be the first opportunity you've had to participate in the Smart Card Alliance event, so please let me give you a bit of background. I should have introduced myself. My name is Randy Vanderhoof. I am the Executive Director of the Smart Card Alliance. And the Smart Card Alliance organization is a multi-industry organization that represents adopters and technology suppliers in all markets that utilize smart card technology. Those include payments, mobile, transportation, healthcare, government and commercial security, and the Internet of Things. The Smart Card Alliance's mission is to stimulate the understanding, adoption, use, and widespread application of this technology, and we do that through a variety of methods, including webinars such as this, and other educational programs, training programs, white papers and reports, and providing a forum for industry organizations to work collaboratively together. One of those groups within the Smart Card Alliance that has been leading the effort around contactless payments is our Payments Council. And the Payments Council role is to facilitate the adoption of chip-enabled payments and payments applications in the U.S. The Payments Council has been focused a lot around EMV in the last few years, but even before EMV, there were contactless chip cards over 10 years ago. And in the case of mobile wallets, the first mobile wallet trials in the U.S. began back in 2012 and were launched in 2013. So the Smart Card Alliance and focus on contactless payments really predates our focus on EMV chip technology most recently. There are a number of additional resources available by the Smart Card Alliance about contactless payments. So that includes contactless EMV payments, the benefits for consumers, merchants, and issuers white paper, as well as a recent publication on EMV and NFC and how complementary technologies enable secure contactless payments. So if we can go to the next slide. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel of speakers today. We were going to begin today's webinar with the introduction on why contactless and why we should be looking at contactless acceptance for merchants today. And that presentation will be delivered by Oliver Manahan from Infineon Technologies. After Oliver, we'll have another presenter, Jose Correa from NXP Semiconductors, who will be talking about the contactless lessons learned in other parts of the world who have already begun making this change to contactless, particularly Australia, UK, and Canada. After Jose, we'll have Alan Friedman from the Ingenico group talk about the merchant benefits for contactless EMV payments from a merchant perspective. And then we'll end our webinar with Michele Quinn from First Data, who's going to share some merchant implementation considerations and some practical steps merchants can do to prepare for contactless payments acceptance. So before we get into our presentation, let me just make a few points for our audience. First, the session that we're presenting today will be recorded, and you'll receive an email after the webinar with a link to the recording and where you can download the deck a few days after the webinar. Also, you have a desktop dashboard that allows you to post questions to myself as well as the speakers, who will be used during the Q&A session at the end of the session. We encourage you to post your questions while the presentations are going on, rather than waiting to the very end, so you have the best opportunity to have those questions answered by the speakers. And finally, if you want additional information about payments in general, or specifically around EMV and contactless, we recommend you visit emv-connection.com, where there are resources organized for merchants, as well as links back to the Smart Card Alliance, and our affiliated organization, the U.S. Payments Forum, formerly the EMV Migration Forum. And now I'll turn the webinar over to our first presenter, Oliver Manahan. Oliver?
Thank you, Randy. Kathy, if you wouldn't mind flipping to the next slide, please. So we thought it would be important to sort of tackle the question that we get asked quite often about contactless payments, which is largely, hey, hasn't this been tried before in the US? We don't believe it was particularly successful. What's different this time around? So I think there's a few factors at play here, and what happened about 10 or 11 years ago was that some trials occurred. So there were some merchants, I would say, a handful. There were a few issuers, but really not enough to drive any sort of critical mass to drive adoption or modify consumer behavior. You frankly, as a consumer, if you had a contactless card, you just couldn't find enough places to use it, and merchants had the exact same issue of saying, I don't understand or see why I should invest in upgrading to new technology to accept contactless, because frankly there are not a lot of consumers that are A, asking for this, or B, even have cards in their wallet or purses to use at my location. And I think part of this was there was really no clear benefit. It was at the time kind of a technology in search of a purpose. So, if you swiped a card, magnetic stripe, it was pretty much the same time it took to tap a card. And further, some of the brands out there adopted new rules that didn't require cardholders to sign or enter a PIN for transactions under a certain amount. So there used to be an argument, hey, you can just tap a card and there's no signature, no PIN required. So that then is faster than swiping a card and entering a PIN or signing. But when those new brand rules came along saying under, for example, $50, you don't need to enter PIN or sign, then the potential speed savings was diminished as well. And from a merchant perspective, and I think this is fairly important, the point of sale readers 10, 11 years ago were add-ons. You actually had to plug in a separate device. It was an adjunct piece. In many instances, if you knew a merchant accepted contactless, sometimes they weren't plugged in, sometimes they were held under the counter because there weren't enough people using them. With today's newer contact chip devices, those readers are built right in now, so there's no longer the necessity of buying a separate piece of hardware and doing the integration. And as importantly, I think the security of the transaction was based on magnetic stripe data. It did have a dynamic code that got generated per transaction, but frankly, it's not as secure as the highest level of security we have today, which is EMV. So the last couple of slides sort of talk about what's different on the global interoperability perspective. So again, a decade ago, there was different contactless specifications that were out there. So in theory, it could happen that you have a contactless card issued in the US, you go over to Europe and try to use it. Europe was based on the EMV contactless standard, so that card may or may not work depending on the card brand. So now that EMV contactless is coming along, the global interoperability that people have enjoyed on magnetic stripe cards and then chip cards now come into contactless as well. And as I'd stated earlier, it is the highest level of security above and beyond just a dynamic token from magnetic stripe transactions. And contactless readers are integrated into the standard point of sale, as I had noted before as well. Kathy, if you could flip to the next. So I think it's important to consider in all instances whenever we're doing something, whether it's payments or any other type of new product, will the consumer care or won't they care? So I'm not sure if anybody's picked up from my accent. I actually live in Canada, and Jose next will speak about the contactless adoption in Canada and Australia and UK. But I see this every day where people prefer the tap versus dip. It's easier, it's more intuitive, and it's certainly faster throughput. Other markets have shown that There's increased usage and frequency, so people tend to spend more if they're not burdened by cash. They tend to use their cards more often. And as a consumer, particularly here in Canada, as the behavior started to change and people saw that this was a better consumer interaction with the merchant, they would seek out issuers of dual interface cards. And again, for the merchant side of things, and this is one that I think the U.S. has handled a little bit better than some markets that adopted EMV earlier, but it's quite easy as you're going through a lengthy EMV transaction to simply forget that you've inserted your card and left it there in the EMV reader. And then you walk away, and unfortunately the burden is then with the merchant to, potentially store that card in a secure lockbox. If the person comes back within the next day or two, perhaps check their ID and then give them their card back. It's certainly a burden that no merchant wants or had asked for during the EMV adoption. But with contactless, the consumer never forfeits control of their card. They simply tap and then immediately can put it back in their pocket, wallet, purse, etc. And again, for the consumer, there's additional use cases, and I cite one here, which is transit. And if you ever go to the Chicago area in the Chicago Transit Authority, there's a blue line that's become open for contactless payments. So when I go down there, I can simply tap on the turnstile for the blue line with my Canadian issued dual interface card, and the turnstile opens up and off I go. I don't have to queue up, buy fare, media, things like that. And then when I get off the line downtown, I go to Starbucks, which is now enabled for contactless. I tap my card and I don't have to worry if I have US dollars or if I'm encumbered with a slow transaction if I decide to insert my card and wait for the EMV transaction to complete, etc. Next slide, please, Kathy. So from the merchant perspective, which I think is why we're all here today, so EMV, the liability shift anniversary date of 1 year just passed a few days ago, and I think it's gone relatively well with all large projects. There have been certain things that people state could have been done better, faster, etc. I think one of the headline news stories that we see probably more often, and certainly through the summertime, was yes, EMV is secure, we get that, it's nice, but as we adopt new technology, why in the world are we now encountering a slower transaction? Everything else seems to be faster with mobile phones and in our lives generally, but all of a sudden at the checkout we've slowed down. And some of the brands have announced quick chip and those sorts of things, which helps, and it certainly is faster typically than the standard EMV transaction, but it's still not as fast as tapping, which takes less than a half a second and getting on your way. So while EMV increased security, it also increased transaction time, whereas contactless transactions will reduce the transaction times, which of course then means faster throughput. And depending on the merchant segment, if you're a jeweler or something, that may not be particularly germane, but for most merchant segments that have multiple lanes or have peak periods such as restaurants and things like that, quick serve restaurants, the quicker you can get people through and the less time they have to worry about how long a payment is taking, the better off the experience is both for the merchant and for the consumer. And with the EMV migration, pretty much everybody's having to put in new point-of-sale devices, and Alan will get into this in a fair bit more detail, but most of the new point-of-sale devices already have contactless capability built in, so it's not a question of whether or not, hey, do I have to go out and spend X dollars on a separate unit and then worry about integrating it. It now becomes a question of, I've got this device, it can support contactless, do I or don't I turn on that contactless capability? And of course, enabling for contactless cards then enables for any contactless device. So, and I'll use Canada again as a perfect case study. Cards have worked here for the last 5 or 6 years brilliantly, but when Apple Pay got launched and when Samsung Pay got launched, those merchants did not have to do a thing. They by virtue of accepting contactless payments, now accepted those mobile payments. And wearables, and Apple Watch is a good example, but there's all sorts of other Fitbit type of devices coming onto market that people want to pay with, and I think there will be more and more in the future. So it's nice that it's the one contactless standard. It's based on EMV, and by a merchant adopting the one, they're set for all. Final slide, I think, of mine now, Kathy. So this is kind of my my attempt at looking at kind of when you do any product launch, and this is sort of a payment-specific pyramid, but it's important to check boxes and say, if we launch contactless, if we enable it, is there something in it for the consumer? Because if, frankly, the consumer doesn't care, then they're not going to ask issuers for cards. They're not going to seek out merchants that that have enabled for contactless. Frankly, it doesn't stand a great chance of doing well in the market. So for the consumer, it's a faster transaction, it's a more convenient transaction, yet it's still a transaction with heightened security. So as I said, I've seen it here in my own home country where consumers absolutely prefer this as a payment method, and will seek out issuers and merchants that have adopted this technology. And then next, does it do anything for the merchant? Because frankly, that's where the rubber hits the road. If the merchant says, listen, there's not a great benefit in this for me, why am I going to make an investment and turn on this capability? Then it will also fall flat. So for the merchant, it's faster throughput, it's still a secure transaction, and I think for consumers coming to those merchant locations, viewed as a progressive merchant. Not only have they enabled for a secure contact transaction, but they're also future looking and enabling for mobile wallets and things like that. Next down is the issuer, and if the issuer has to make an investment as well, whether it's for a dual interface card, so a contact chip card that also has an antenna that will do contactless, or into mobile payments and things like that, the issuer has to make an investment. And the questions are, is it still secure? The answer is yes. If it's a consumer preference, and again, we've seen this in other markets, where the consumer will start saying, listen, I've seen my friends, they have contactless cards, I really want that technology as well. If issuer A does not offer that, and that's been my traditional card of choice, then I will seek out issuer B or C and get a card from them because I want to have that technology as well. And for the issuer, it also opens up new use cases for where you might be able to tap a card or a device. And the network, so the, whether it's regional networks, they love electronic transactions and they love secure transactions. So the more you can increase transactions, and we have had data historically that shows that as contactless, because it's faster and it's secure, will tend to shift tender away from cash. So, coffee shops, again, a great example where a coffee may cost $3 or $4. Historically, somebody might be conscientious about holding up the line for a $3 or $4 transaction with a credit or debit card transaction, so they would just pull out a $5 bill and pay. But with contactless, it's even faster than paying with $5, getting change back, perhaps putting a bit of that change in the tip canister, and then moving on. That takes a while, but with contactless, people don't have that same inhibition about using a card because it is so fast, it is secure, and therefore it increases transactions, hopefully for all stakeholders, the network, the issuer, and the merchant. With that, I'll turn it over to Jose, who I think is going to speak about the various lessons learned in 3 key markets. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. And yeah, we're going to cover 3 markets, and we all know that the U.S. market is quite complex and unique. So we're not shying away from that. We know it represents its own set of challenges. However, we would like to spend some time talking about these 3 markets that we believe show some of the benefits of a successful contactless implementation, right? So we're going to go to the next slide, Kathy. So we'll start with Australia, and Australia is, I guess, we can consider a mature market for contactless cards. It is a mainstream product there, and today it's well beyond low-value transactions, right? And it is a market that, interestingly enough, for both issuance and merchant acceptance, it started before there was even a discussion on mobile payments. So it's not a market that was driven by mobile payment adoption. It was purely on the card side. What we see there today is that the annual contactless spend is about 3 billion Australian dollars, and over 60% of all debit transactions are contactless. This is a market where contactless transactions are everyday occurrences, and over half the population has used a contactless card. And today it's estimated that 2/3 of eligible population own a contactless or dual interface card. And not only do they own it, they actually use it quite frequently, and the usage rates are increasing. So today we're looking at 60% of them use it once a week, which is significantly up from in the 40% range back a couple of years ago. So can we move to the next slide, Kevin? On the acceptance side, we have a market where major merchants and small businesses have contactless terminals in place, and that has resulted in a significant percentage of those transactions going to contactless, with Coles, one of the major merchants in the region, reporting over 70% of transactions now on contactless. Also, that means that the fact that there are more transactions also matches the fact that users like to pay with contactless cards. There is a significant preference of contactless over contact cards, and a significant preference on contactless over cash, which actually reinforces the point that Oliver made a few minutes ago, that contactless cards have an important role displacing cash, and in Australia particularly, this is a trend that is expected to continue growing in the next few years. Next slide, please, Captain. We're now going to move to the UK. In the UK, we've seen contactless transactions with continuous growth. In the UK, it's also quite significant. They represent about 7.75 billion pounds a year. It's more than double the amount of the previous 7 years combined. So that gives you an idea how not only how much it represents, but how fast is growing. It represents over 20% of all spent in the UK, and it's not only the volume but also the number of transactions. The number of transactions is also well over 20% of the total, and again shown incredible growth in the past few years, and expected to grow even further. Today, over 50% of the credit and debit cards in circulation are contactless capable. And just as the acceptance, the issuance is expected to grow. So moving to the next slide. On the acceptance side, and this is something quite specific to the UK market, Transport for London played a significant role on contactless adoption, and we see some of that today, as Oliver mentioned, in Chicago taking place, but in the UK, for London alone, Transport for London represented 1 million contactless transactions per day. So that has been quite significant. And in addition to Transport for London, there are over 460,000 contactless capable terminals that guarantee that the infrastructure is there for the continuous growth, and not only from the card side but also on the mobile side, which so we expect mobile payments to benefit from this acceptance rates. As acceptance improves, customer satisfaction has been also on the rise. The main factors, as we've seen, is again transaction speed, the convenience, and the safety. And interestingly enough, and this study was specific to the perception of the transaction speed and the time it took to go through a full payment transaction. Customers report 50% faster transactions compared to traditional chip and PIN. So that makes a big difference in certain merchant segments. So moving to the next slide, and finally into Canada. So Canada, just like the U.S., actually had their first attempt at contactless transactions back in 2005, and just like the U.S., there wasn't that much adoption back then. It was the benefits were probably not as significant back then, and the challenges, the same challenges that Oliver mentioned on his section, applied here. What changed was that after the EMV migration, it quickly became clear that the slower throughput due to increased transaction times could be mitigated by adopting contactless at the merchant and at the issuance level. By late 2014, Canada already had over 70% of their credit and over 40% of their debit cards as dual interface. So right after the EMV migration, they moved directly into it, into dual interface products. And on the usage side is also quite significant, with contactless transactions representing around 30% of all transactions. And what's interesting is that number has increased linearly as the limits for contactless transactions have increased. So they've moved from $50 to $100, and that same and at the same rate the number of transactions have increased. Moving on to the next slide. In Canada, acceptance is well underway there on several merchants, and particularly on merchant categories that represent the low value transactions. So grocery stores, quick service restaurants, pharmacies, gas stations already have over 80% of contactless adoption on the terminal side. And when we look at nationally for Canada, over 30% of all POS devices already support contactless transactions. So this is a market where that grew fast and on both sides of the equation. And as Oliver mentioned, on the merchant and on the acceptance side, it's having tremendous implications now that mobile is becoming a reality as well. So that's it for the examples on different markets. We now move to Alan on his next section.
Okay, go ahead and take the next slide, please. And thank you, Jose. So as Oliver mentioned earlier, briefly, as merchants implement EMV contactless encompasses plastic contactless cards, as well as mobile wallets, as well as wearables such as watches, and even the ring, which made its debut during the Olympics in Rio. And you will soon be able to get a ring with card information embedded in it that works very securely at a contactless device. I think they're even doing pre-orders of those rings now. Next slide, please. So, from a merchant benefit perspective, of course, the merchants gain great benefit out of a better consumer experience because that'll keep the consumers happy and keep them coming back. For some merchants, their consumers will just perceive that the checkout is faster. Contact is the fastest way to pay using EMV chip technology, as Oliver mentioned earlier. There is no need to leave the card in the card reader, the POS device, for the duration of the transaction, or in fact to insert the card at all. And therefore it eliminates the early card removal issues and card abandonment issues that some merchants experience with EMV. People will forget to remove their card, go off and leave, and the merchant has these cards in a secure place somewhere in their store. New initiatives, again, Quick Chip, M-Chip Fast for MasterCard and others. They also offer some of these same features where you don't need to leave the card in the POS device for very long, but you still do need to take the card out, insert it, put it back in, whereas contactless, especially with mobile wallets, you don't even involve a card at all. Next slide. in addition, because of the technology we're using today with contactless, which is called near field communication, or NFC, it is possible to have two-way communication between, say, a mobile phone and a payment device, a payment terminal. So it's possible to tie loyalty programs to mobile wallets to provide a personalized communications, promotional opportunities, couponing, and provide transaction histories. In addition, with mobile wallet applications like Apple Pay and Android Pay, there's a perception of increased security. There is, and in fact, there is increased security even over and above plastic cards, because you have the opportunity to use your fingerprints or other biometrics with a mobile wallet to make sure that it's an authorized user using that device and not someone who's just stolen a phone. Also, compared to contact EMV, where someone inserts the card, performing a contactless transaction is much more intuitive, requires minimal participation by a sales associate. You don't have to stop and explain, well, here's what you do here and you have to do that. It is, you know, they tap it and they know they're done. Next slide. Now, as we've seen in other regions, they have there are contactless limits in most other regions in the world, and most of that is due to the fact that they began their contactless implementation prior to the advent of popular mobile wallets. And in those cases where there is a contactless limit, if the transaction exceeds the contactless limit, then you have to insert the card. In the U.S., we're actually seeing mobile adoption in advance of plastic card adoption. So if you're using a mobile wallet, and if you exceeded a contactless limit, it would tell you to insert the card, and you might not have a card. All you've got is your phone. You can't insert that. So in the U.S., there are no contactless limits. So they're never going to require you to insert a card. Most merchants may accept small ticket transactions under the card brands or the payment network's limit without a PIN or signature on both contactless and contact transactions, and that's very beneficial when using the mobile wallet. And if the mobile device does support fingerprint or PIN or face recognition or whatever, then they can use that to validate their identity for transactions that exceed that no CVM limit. So if, for example, if that no CVM limit was $50 and you're purchasing $150, you can use your fingerprint or other biometrics, and then regardless of the amount, you don't have to go in and enter a PIN or sign anything, and it continues the speed and seamless checkout, where you can just more rapidly get through with your transaction from a consumer perspective and from a merchant perspective. That method is called variously on-device cardholder verification method or consumer device cardholder verification method. They mean the same thing, but for some reason we have two different acronyms for that. Go ahead to the next slide, please. From a securities perspective, and there are some people today that we know aren't taking advantage of mobile wallet technology because they're not certain about the security. The security on a mobile wallet uses the same dynamic data security as EMV contact cards, which is very secure. A unique identifier on every transaction identifies that that is the genuine card and not a counterfeit card. If there are biometrics, then you're identifying the card holder if the transaction calls for that. In addition, the mobile wallets use tokenization, removing the actual account number from the merchant system, so all the merchant has is a token. Those tokens are device and channel specific, so The token for your phone may be different from the token on your ring or on your, and certainly different from the number that's on your plastic card. And if you have two phones, they'll have unique tokens, and they are card present tokens. So someone can't take that token and use it for another transaction. From a plastic card perspective, the dual interface contactless cards, which basically means they have both contact and contactless functionality, they may also support offline data authentication, and that's a method where the chip on the card, working with the card reader, can do some validation before the transaction even goes online to get an approval to verify that it is not a counterfeit card. And that's especially useful in cases where a merchant is unable to go online for some reason, if their communications are down, and they're doing a deferred authorization where they will send that authorization in later. If they and the card both support offline data authentication, then they have a certain level of security that that card is not counterfeit. That's it for us. And we're on to Michele for implementation considerations.
Thank you, Alan. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about a merchant's journey to becoming contactless enabled and some items for consideration as merchants implement contactless solutions. So while some merchants were early adopters of MSD contactless payments, it really was the October 1st of 2015 EMV liability shift that drove merchants to start upgrading their POS solutions to adopt EMV technology. And in turn, this encouraged merchants to adopt contactless while the so-called hood was up and they were already doing work for contact. Many merchants started their journey by purchasing EMV-capable hardware, which most of you would probably agree proved a little bit simpler than actually getting the corresponding EMV software. Merchants focused on implementing EMV contact solutions in part because there wasn't always a contact and contactless certified version of the software, and they really wanted to make sure that they implemented a solution that offered protection from the liability shift prior to or shortly after October 1st. Merchants that were able to actually implement contactless at the same time as they implemented contact solutions really were future-proofing their business for the next big wave of payments, which is contactless. And I want to be sure to point out that merchants who implemented contact and then want to add contactless in the future, they will need to do another certification to certify that contactless solution. So something that's important to note. Next slide, please. So as merchants come in to do certifications or even to do regression testing of an ISV certified EMV solution, there are some things to consider. The first one is make sure to do due diligence. Really make sure as a merchant you are ready to begin certification. I can tell you from experience, the better prepared a merchant is, the better and faster the whole certification testing and process will go. And then the second one here is ensure the device being implemented supports contactless. And as obvious as that statement seems, too often what we see is that merchants want to implement a contactless device, but it doesn't support or it's not certified for contactless. So very important to confirm with the vendor that the solution that you want to implement supports contactless. Next slide, please. And then as merchants in the U.S. roll out EMV solutions into their businesses, the contactless payment infrastructure necessary for the growth of contactless adoption is really being built out now. And as more certified EMV contact and contactless solutions become available, merchants are implementing both at the same time. Again, they avoid that secondary certification, and that results in more merchant locations accepting contactless payments. So for merchants that supported earlier forms of contactless transactions, such as the contactless MSD, as we've talked about earlier in the webinar, they utilize NFC technology, but didn't include all of the juicy EMV data, and they are also now moving to support EMV contactless. All of this basically means that there are more merchant locations accepting contactless in the U.S. and allowing for global interoperability using EMV contactless cards and mobile devices worldwide. The underlying component, and I want to make sure to call this out, is the underlying component is really that adoption is driven by consumers. Consumers want the safety from counterfeit fraud that EMV provides. They also want the quickness that contactless offers. And as more contactless form factors such as mobile and wearables become available, it's the convenience and added security, whether that's a PIN or through the biometric authentication. And not to mention, honestly, people think paying this way is pretty cool, especially the younger generation. And this really drives consumer adoption and the demand for merchants to support a contactless ecosystem as well. So next slide, please. So there are lots of compelling reasons to implement contactless to consider. Contactless payments use tokenization to mask the payment account number, and there can be challenges when it comes to processing business functions such as loyalty programs on tokenized transactions, since the full PAN may not be available. And I'll give you an example. So say you go to your local coffee shop every day, and one day you pay for your coffee with your watch, the next day you come in with your mobile device, and then you come in with your contactless card. There's not an easy way to tie all of those transactions together for loyalty purposes. So to help alleviate these challenges, Ingenico has developed a new data element called Payment Account Reference, or PAR. PAR allows tracking across all EMV tokens associated with an underlying PAN. Regardless of changes to the PAN, a payment account represented by one PAN will always have one PAR, so it's a one-to-one relationship. And PAR enables situations like my coffee shop example to be tied back together to the same primary account number. So I know that's a lot of information. I really didn't want to get too deep into PAR. I just want you to know that it's relatively new, but I wanted folks to be familiar with the term and certainly to expect more to come from Ingenico around the subject of PAR. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it back over to Randy for Q&A.
Terrific. Thank you, Michele, and all of our speakers for doing a great job in presenting the content in today's webinar. We do have about 15 minutes left for questions, and we've received a number of them. You can feel free to continue to submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible before we have to end today's webinar. First question that came up has to do with contactless security. And so the question was raised, if our terminals are not EMV enabled, how secure is our contactless payment that we are able to accept functioning? Oliver, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at it. So, and I'll go back to my example of 10 or 11 years ago when there was contactless cards that didn't have a contact chip plate on them. Those cards still had a chip on them, and the chip still provided for a 3-digit dynamic code that, as its name would imply, changed per transaction. So certainly already I think magnitudes more secure than magnetic stripe swipe, where you always got the same static data every single time. So, you know, I was trying to make an example of the fact that magnetic stripe data contactless is not as secure as EMV, but, you know, the EMV provides for global interoperability and is also a bit stronger cryptography, but otherwise magnetic stripe contactless is still quite secure. I think it just becomes then one of those questions, as many of the panelists have pointed out, that if and when you upgrade your systems to contact-based EMV and that reader has contactless capability built in, do you turn that on as well? But, you know, to any merchants out there that are still haven't upgraded but are accepting contactless mag stripe data, I think it's still orders of magnitude more secure than traditional magnetic stripe on the back of a card.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. This next question I'll direct to Jose, but if anybody else would like to respond afterwards, please do. I believe that Australia launched contactless together with EMV, but if the U.S. has just recently issued all of its cards as contact only, how are we going to convince issuers and merchants that we should be switching to dual interface or contact and contactless cards?
Yeah, and I can definitely take that one. Andy, I might throw something at Oliver at the end there because of his experience in Canada, but I would say, I mean, it's based from the conversations we have with issuers and also with merchants. It's always this chicken and egg problem, right? On issuers are definitely interested, but they want to see the acceptance, and merchants, I believe, are interested as well, but they want to make sure that the cardholders have a product in their cards to use it. I think the business case comes from three main points, right? And I think it's something that was seen in Canada, in Australia, but it was also seen in the other regions, right? So one of them is the potential of cash displacement. I think not only parties like Smart Alliance know it, but also the payment brands have evidence to show that most of the transactions, as you move to contactless transactions, are low value and have better potential to displace cash, which benefits everyone, right? So that's definitely one key point. Then it's also customer satisfaction, right, from the cardholder, and Oliver mentioned it, and it was something that was seen in Canada, which, by the way, did something similar to the U.S. They moved to EMV primarily, like just chip contact, and almost immediately started looking at dual interface, mostly because of customer satisfaction. It's because of that speed of transaction, but it's also because it's really easier. The experience of tapping is much closer to the experience of swapping. So if to swiping your card, so if you were already used to a quick swipe of your card in the reader, the experience for the consumer will be similar if you're just tapping the card. And then finally was the differentiation. Well, and that applies to the early movers, right? But the differentiation, if you bring a contactless or dual interface product to market, and the opportunity to become top of wallet. And I'm talking about my personal experience because I did live. I lived in Canada also a couple of years while we were going through the EMV and the dual interface transition. My experience and my family's experience and my friends' experience was, if I have a dual interface card, that's probably going to be the first one that I use. So as we present those cases to the issuers, we believe that that not only is there traction, but there will be even more adoption moving forward, as long as it's supported also by the merchants, because it always comes down to that. If we are spending, or if we're investing to become top of wallet and to differentiate from our issuer competitors, we want to make sure that the cardholders have a place to use the card. So it's always going to be a two-pronged approach. And I'm going to defer to Oliver to see if he has any additional comments on what he saw in Canada, because I think that might be the more relevant comparison on a market that moved first one way and immediately readjusted for dual interface.
Yeah, thanks, Jose, and that was very well handled. I said it before, and maybe it's worth reiterating, that there were a couple of issuers up here in Canada that decided to take the leap of faith, and one of them was actually an issuer that was also the largest grocery retailer in Canada. So they controlled both the merchant side and the issuance side. So they had their sales associates actually very much invested in making sure that the holders of their card were tapping whenever they were able to do so, based on transaction limits, etc. And as those two issuers took the leap of faith, they actually started gaining consumers away from other issuers. And I think nothing motivates, whether it's an issuer or anybody in a particular business environment, more than losing consumers. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. pans out, and we're already starting to see, I think, some issuance, and we know for sure there are already some dual interface issuers in the U.S. and one that might not be widely known yet, but the Costco Citibank Visa card is in fact a dual interface card. If anybody has it and they flip it over, you can see the contactless marks on the back of it. So, I start thinking, if there is a predominant number of consumers that hold that card in the greater New York area, and the MTA is talking very aggressively about their new fare media system being contactless enabled for open loop payments, then that absolutely will do, I think, what Jose has said, which is move that card to top of wallet. If I can spend my entire day pulling out one card, or having one card at my disposal where I tap on and tap off of the subway system, and then I go and get my coffee, then I go and get my lunch, and then I do all my other spending with that, then people start becoming attracted to that card. And then, in my mind, what happened in Canada was very much like a domino effect. Once one or two of the dominoes started falling, and the issuers saw that there was an absolute consumer pull towards the contactless and dual interface cards, all of them rushed very quickly and said, we need to issue this product as well. So that's kind of what happened. So we'll see. Hopefully it happens in the U.S. as well. Time will tell.
Thanks, Oliver. And just to add to that statement with regard to availability of dual interface cards, American Express has reported that all of the American Express cards are available as dual interface cards, and if the consumer has one that is simple or contact only, they can request the dual interface card. Okay, another question, this one for you, Alan, since it involves a question about current Ingenico terminal devices right now works for Apple Pay, but they're not EMV enabled at the point of sale or the merchant processor yet. Will that device be able to work with other rings and watches that were mentioned?
Well, it'll work with watches, because the watches are essentially an extension of what's on the mobile phone. The rings tend to be more of a single. They're more like a tag. They're more like a single card. They don't. It's not really a wallet on a ring. It represents a single card. As new issuing devices and new cards get certified by the issuers, they are going to be EMV only certified, because there is a move from the card brands to not certify in any more MSD contactless payment instruments. So the Costco card that Oliver mentioned is EMV only. It is not backward compatible to extract readers, so even from a plastic card perspective, those cards will not work at a non-EMV contactless capable device, which we have heard some confusion from some of our customers about that, and it because it doesn't work, and it's really not supposed to work if they don't have EMV enabled. So that is, because Apple Pay and Android Pay were engineered to be backward compatible and the cards are provisioned that way, then they will continue to work. But as new wearable devices come out, they are less and less likely to work unless you have EMV contactless.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Michele, I'm going to pass this question off to you. Since it was reported, I think, several times that merchants who have EMV-capable terminals have the ability to support contactless, even if EMV has not been enabled on their device. But are all of the parties in the 3- or 4-party system ready to support all merchant point-of-sale systems for contactless, meaning the processors, acquirers, and the software vendors?
I can tell you from a first data perspective. So, you know, we have certified many solutions. We do have to have the ISV or the merchant certify the solution, as do other processors as well. But we are seeing more and more merchants and ISVs come in with contact and contactless and want to certify those both at the same time. Not every solution out there supports contactless right now, but we are certainly seeing more of those devices being certified, and then we are going ahead and certifying those as well. So if the device is supporting contactless and the vendor has certified with us, we are absolutely ready to support contactless, and we have been for quite a while.
Thank you, Michele. So we have time for one more question. I'm going to direct this one to Alan, but if anybody else wants to join in, they can. Why is the payment transactions processed using contactless faster than EMV cards used when you insert them in a payment terminal?
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on. The actual transaction itself, meaning from the time the transaction authorization request is created and sent to get an approval and comes back, that doesn't change between contact and contactless. That time is still the same. What is different is, for one thing, is the perception from the customer perspective, because many terminals, if not most terminals, allow the consumer to insert their card as soon as they want to, whenever they want to. EMV does not work, does not even begin working in most cases today until the total amount is known and received from the cash register. So until everything is scanned, the card is just sitting there not really doing anything. Once it receives the total amount, then it can create the cryptogram and provide all the data back to the payment application to create that transaction and authorization request. Now some devices may tell the consumer to wait until the amount is there before they insert the card, but still someone's standing there holding their card waiting to insert it, so it still gives the perception that it's slower. Tapping, somewhat similar, but they are prompted to tap, and they can tap in, and they're not waiting to get their card out of the machine, so it's not as much of an impact to the consumer. On the other end of that transaction, when the response comes back, if the card is inserted, there's typically data coming back as part of that transaction that goes to the card, validating the issuer information and any instructions that the issuer wants to update on the card, which is very, very rare, especially in the U.S. Contactless does not support those because it's not near enough to the reader long enough to do that. Quick chip and those other solutions that we talked about earlier, they also don't support that last piece of data, which is what allows people to remove their cards sooner. So for those two reasons, the front end of the transaction, where when the card is inserted, it's not doing anything for a while, and on the back end, where it doesn't have to wait for data to come back on the transaction, those are the two data elements that make the time through the lane faster.
Okay, thank you, Alan, and thank you all for taking the time to answer these questions. So if we could just move to the last slide. We're out of time for today, but I want to thank all of our speakers for their presentations today. And if any of you in the audience have any follow-ups that you'd like to do to the Smart Card Alliance or any of our speakers, we've provided you with their email addresses to send direct messages to them. Just repeat that we will be providing the deck and a link to the audio recording of this webinar shortly once we've had an opportunity to upload all of the content and the audio recording to the website. If you are interested in signing up for a Smart Card Alliance newsletter or access to more educational content, we would encourage you to visit the Smart Card Alliance website for that information. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to seeing you at a future Smart Card Alliance webinar. Thank you.